The Iron Throne still smoked beneath her when she stepped over the scorched bones. The Red Keep, once the symbol of centuries of kings and queens, was now broken, rubble, ash, and melted steel. Daenerys Stormborn had done what no one else dared. She had not just taken the throne, she had claimed it with fire. The people of King's Landing never heard her name again without a shiver. Mothers whispered her victories like warnings to their children. Be careful, or the Dragon Queen will come. But in that moment, as she stood before what was left of the Iron Throne, Daenerys felt empty. It was done. She had won. And yet, the ghosts screamed louder now than ever before. Drogon circled above, his wings slicing through black smoke like a cleaver through flesh. The sky itself seemed to mourn, ashen clouds drifting over the ruined city, casting the sun in a pale, lifeless glow. The screams had quieted. Those who survived were silent, afraid to breathe too loudly. Jon Snow stood behind her, blood on his hands, dust on his face, silence in his heart. He watched her, watched the way her silver hair danced in the wind, and tried to reconcile the woman he had loved with the one who had commanded a massacre. His sword felt heavier than usual, like it knew something he didn't. She was their queen, Jon told himself. She freed them. But deep inside, he knew that wasn't freedom. It was conquest. It was submission, demanded by fire. Daenerys turned to him with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We've broken the wheel," she said. Her voice was calm, almost tender. "We'll build something better, together." He nodded, but his heart was full of stones. The following days were filled with smoke and silence. Daenerys sat the throne in what remained of the great hall, with the roof blown open and the stained glass shattered. Her court was a strange mixture of survivors and foreign loyalists, unsullied, Dothraki and a few Westerosi lords too afraid to oppose her. Tyrion was one of them. He'd been found wandering the rubble, staring at the ruins of the Red Keep. His brother and sister buried beneath it, his city destroyed, and the queen he had once believed in now ruled over corpses. When Grey Worm dragged him before Daenerys, Tyrion didn't beg. He didn't explain. He just looked at her and said, "You chose fear." Daenerys didn't flinch. Fear is the only language they ever understood. She imprisoned him, of course, but not for long. She had plans for him, plans for all of them. Meanwhile, the rest of Westeros watched in shock. The North had gone quiet, uncertain. Sansa Stark didn't kneel. She sent no raven, no oath. Daenerys took it as defiance. Arya Stark had disappeared. Some said she was on her way back to Winterfell. Others claimed she never left the ruins of the city, walking among the dead in silence, learning the paths of the shadows once more. Davos Seaworth, once a loyal advisor, had returned to Dragonstone. He didn't speak of what he saw, not to anyone, and Jon had stayed by her side, not because he believed in her anymore, but because he had to understand how love had turned to ashes. He walked beside her like a man watching the sea swallow. His home, helpless, hopeless. The first decree she made as queen was simple: all the old systems die with fire. A new realm, born of justice, will rise from their bones. She renamed King's Landing, called it Nymeria, after the warrior queen of old. The people hated it, but no one said a word. Daenerys outlawed the noble houses. What was left of them? She sent ravens across the land. "No more lords, no more thrones. You are citizens of the realm now, equal under my justice." Those who resisted were branded traitors. Drogon's shadow made sure no one forgot, and still, Jon stayed. His dreams were filled with screams. His hands could still feel the heat of the flames. He watched her sleep at night, her brow peaceful, her lips parted, and wondered, how could someone so beautiful burn so many? But he couldn't leave. Not yet. Not until he made his choice. The silence inside the great hall became part of the throne itself. The Iron Throne, twisted and blackened from Drogon's fire, now stood alone atop a pile of ruin, mocking what it once represented. Daenerys sat upon it not with pride, but with a weight in her eyes no one seemed to understand. She told herself it was duty, destiny, justice, but something else lurked beneath her skin. The fire she once wielded to liberate had turned inward, consuming the parts of her that still cared. Jon watched her from the side of the room, silent as always. He had barely spoken since the day the city fell. He ate little, slept less, and when he did sleep, it was restless, haunted by children screaming and walls crumbling. He saw Arya's face in the smoke, heard Tyrion's voice in the silence, but most of all, he dreamed of Daenerys, standing alone on that throne of melted swords, her eyes glowing not with hope, but with something darker. The Unsullied lined the hall like statues. Grey Worm stood closest to her, never smiling, never questioning. He was her sword now, her loyal executioner. He took his orders with the cold efficiency of a man who had buried his soul alongside Missandei. When Daenerys said, "Bring him," he brought them. When she said, "Kill him," he did not hesitate. Tyrion sat in a cell beneath the Red Keep. It was damp, cold, and the stone walls still trembled at times from the unstable ruins above. He knew death was near, but not in the way he expected. Daenerys hadn't executed him, not yet. That was the strange part. She visited him once, days after his imprisonment. She stood at the bars, staring down at him like she was trying to read a language she'd forgotten. "You chose Jaime," she said softly, "even after everything." "I chose mercy," Tyrion replied. "You chose fire." She didn't answer. She turned and left without a word. He hadn't seen her since. Outside the city, camps of Dothraki and Unsullied stretched as far as the eye could see. No one dared challenge them. Lords who once ruled proud castles now knelt in the dirt before foreign soldiers. Ravens flew day and night, declarations of loyalty, pleas for mercy, reports of unrest. The riverlands were beginning to boil. The north remained silent, and the Vale, too cautious to move, too afraid to speak. Sansa Stark had sent no reply. Not to Daenerys, not to Jon. That silence said everything. Jon knew it, and Daenerys did too. One night, she summoned him privately. No guards, no advisors, just the two of them, standing at the top of the broken tower that overlooked the ruins of King's Landing. The wind howled through the cracks. The city below looked like a graveyard made of stone. "Do you believe in me, Jon?" she asked. He didn't answer at first. Then he said, "I believed in the woman who freed the slaves, who showed mercy in Meereen, who spared the weak." She turned to him, eyes narrowing. "That woman died in the ashes." Jon's jaw tightened. "And what rose in her place?" Daenerys stepped closer. "A queen who does what needs to be done." The silence between them felt sharp, like a blade held at the throat. She reached for his hand, her touch warm, but it burned him. He didn't pull away, but he didn't squeeze back either. "I need you," she whispered. "The people love you. You're a symbol of honor. They will follow if you lead with me." Jon looked down at the rubble. They already followed someone. Once and now they're dead. Daenerys gripped his hand tighter. "We're building something new, better. You said you wanted to break the wheel. This is how it's done." He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He simply walked away. Later that night, a raven arrived from Winterfell. Jon opened it alone. "The North does not recognize Queen Daenerys Stormborn. The North is free. Do not return unless you return as one of us." Sansa Stark, Queen in the North. His heart sank. The cold in the words hit harder than any sword. Sansa had made her choice. The North was done bending the knee, and she had drawn a line in the snow. One Jon could no longer straddle. He folded the letter carefully and burned it in a candle's flame. No one would read it but him. not even Daenerys, but she knew, she always knew. That night, Grey Worm executed 3 noblemen from the Reach for conspiring to flee the capital. The day after, the Tarly banner was outlawed. And on the 3rd day, Daenerys summoned her army. We marched north. The march north was not a quiet one. The march north was not a quiet one. Daenerys rode ahead of the unsullied lines, flanked by Dothraki screamers and shadows cast by Drogon as he circled above. The air grew colder with every mile, but her fire burned hotter. She said little to her commanders, offering only commands, sharp, final, unquestionable. Villages along the King's Road emptied before they even arrived, word travelling faster than horse hooves. The Dragon Queen was coming. Jon rode near the rear of the column, behind the generals, behind Grey Worm. He didn't speak unless spoken to, and even then his answers were short and hollow. The north was his home, but this wasn't. A return. It felt like an invasion, one he had helped lead. He couldn't stop thinking about the Raven, about Sansa's words, about how the people in Winterfell would look at him when he arrived, not as one of them, but as the lover and ally of their conqueror. Would Arya even look him in the eye? Would Sansa let him through the gates? Would Bran say anything at all? The cold bit deep now. It was the kind of chill that slipped into your bones and whispered old truths that the North never forgets. That the North bows to no queen, that Jon Snow had bent the knee, and it was not forgiven. Grey Worm stayed silent through the journey. He had no warmth left for conversation, no room for anything except duty. His eyes no longer held rage, only calculation. Each village they passed, he marked with men, controlled, occupied. For peace, Daenerys had said, for unity. But to Jon, it looked like occupation. By the time they reached the Neck, scouts returned with news. The lords of the North are gathering at Winterfell. Lady Sansa has called the bannermen. She refuses to treat with the Queen. Daenerys didn't flinch. Then we'll take the meeting to her doorstep. She didn't ask Jon to speak to Sansa. She didn't even mention his name. 3 nights before, reaching Winterfell, Jon found Arya waiting in the woods. He saw her before she spoke. A shadow in the trees, a ghost of the girl he once knew. "I thought you were dead," he said. Arya stepped into the moonlight, her expression unreadable. "I was. And then I wasn't. That's how life works now, I guess." They stood facing each other for a long time. He tried to find the words, but they didn't come. "You're with her," Arya said finally, like she was saying something vulgar. "I'm not—" He stopped. "It's not that simple." She stepped closer. Voice cold. "She burned a city, Jon. I walked through it. I saw the children, the mothers holding their babies, charred into the walls. I smelled the hair burning off their heads." Jon swallowed hard. "She's not the same woman you followed across the narrow sea," Arya said. "She's something else now, and you know it." He looked away. She wants peace. She wants control. They didn't speak again that night. When he returned to camp, Daenerys was waiting in his tent. "I saw her," he said. "Arya." Daenerys's eyes flickered. "Did she offer peace?" "No," she offered. "Truth." Daenerys stepped toward him slowly, the tension humming in her every word. "You still doubt me?" "I doubt what this has become." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "We're so close, Jon. After this, there will be no one left to oppose us. We'll have peace. Real peace." He stared into her eyes and felt the last pieces of his heart pulling in 2 directions, duty and blood, love and guilt, fire and ice. "I want to believe you," he said. "Then believe in us," she whispered, her lips brushing against his. He kissed her, but it felt like the last thing he'd ever do as a Stark. When the army reached Winterfell, the gates were shut tight. The walls bristled with archers. Northern banners waved defiantly in the wind. Stark, Mormont, Glover, Reed, the old names, the loyal names. Sansa stood atop the battlements, her red hair whipping in the cold breeze, her eyes locked onto Daenerys. Like a sword drawn across the sky, Jon stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. "Sansa," he called out, "let us talk." Her voice came down hard and sharp. "There's nothing left to talk about, Jon. You chose your queen. I chose my people." Daenerys didn't wait. "Bring the dragon," she said to Grey Worm. Jon's heart broke a little more. The scream of Drogon shattered the sky before the first stone ever flew. His wings beat the air into storms as he rose. Above the army, circling Winterfell like a vulture waiting for the dying to begin. Snow still covered the roofs of the stronghold, but it wouldn't last. Not against fire. Not against a queen who had already burned a capital city to ash. Daenerys stood at the front lines in full armor, silver and black, her gaze locked on the walls of Winterfell. Beside her stood Grey Worm, unspeaking, unmoving. Behind them, ranks of Unsullied and Dothraki stretched like a shadow across the snow. The contrast between the southern-blooded army and the cold, frost-bitten north could not have been clearer. Jon didn't stand beside her this time. He watched from the back, silent, shivering in more than just the cold. His sword was still sheathed. His heart was still screaming. He had begged her hours before in her tent beneath the banners of House Targaryen. He had fallen to one knee, not out of love or loyalty, but desperation. "Don't do this," he whispered. "You can still walk away. They won't follow you, but they won't fight either. Let them be free." She had looked at him then, a strange sadness in her eyes. "I offered freedom once," she said. "They spat on it, mocked it. Now they'll learn to value peace through fire." "And what happens after that?" he asked. "Who will love you then?" She didn't answer. Now here they were. The moment had come. Sansa stood atop the battlements again, but she wasn't alone. Arya was beside her, and so was Bran, his expression unreadable, distant, almost like he already knew how this would end. The northern forces were outnumbered. That was clear. The Queen had dragons. But the North had something else, a will that never broke. Not for Targaryens, not for Lannisters, not even for death itself. A horn blew from the walls of Winterfell. No words, no surrender, just defiance. Daenerys raised her hand, and Drogon descended. The first burst of fire hit the outer wall. Stone cracked, snow hissed into steam. Arrows launched from the battlements, but they barely pierced Drogon's hide. He screamed again, a sound that shook the bones of every man and woman on the field. Grey Worm gave the signal. The Unsullied advanced in formation, shields raised. The Dothraki, wild and bloodthirsty, surged forward with screams that echoed back from the icy walls. Jon stood frozen, his sword still sheathed, watching as the North was consumed by war. On the wall, Sansa watched fire crawl across her home. She didn't flinch, she didn't scream, she just said, "Hold!" Arya was already gone. Somewhere in the chaos behind the walls, she had vanished into the shadows. Inside Winterfell, Glover men fought beside Mormonts, steel clashing with spears. The Unsullied were disciplined, but the North knew the land, knew every stone, every hidden path, every weakness. It wasn't just a battle of strength, it was a battle of memory, of pride. And then Drogon rose again. This time he aimed for the main gate. Jon's heart stopped. He couldn't stay still anymore. He rode forward, past Dothraki, past Grey Worm, straight into the firelight. People shouted after him, but he didn't stop. He reached Daenerys just as she lifted her hand again. He grabbed her wrist. "Don't!" Her eyes burned like the fire she controlled. "You would stop me?" "I'm asking you to see," he said. "You'll turn Winterfell into another graveyard. They defy me. They defy tyranny." The word hit her harder than he expected. For a moment, she looked at him, not as a queen, not as a conqueror, but as a woman who had been betrayed, abandoned, forgotten by the world so many times. Her lips trembled, and then her face hardened. "I am not my father," she said. "No," Jon said softly. "You're worse. He burned for madness. You burn for belief." She pulled her wrist free, and Drogon roared again. Behind them, Arya was already inside the Queen's camp. She moved like death itself, a whisper through tents and shadows, her eyes locked on Daenerys just once across the battlefield. She watched Jon grab her, watched the fire swell, and made her decision. If he wouldn't do it, she would. Snow fell again that night, soft and quiet, as if the gods were trying to cover the blood. But no snow could hide the burn marks on Winterfell's gates or the blackened bodies that lined the battlefield where fire met ice and neither surrendered. The assault had paused. Daenerys had ordered Drogon to stand down after the second wave, not out of mercy, but strategy. She wanted to give them time to doubt, time to realize resistance meant death. She wanted the North to beg, but they didn't. Jon walked alone through the aftermath, boots crunching in frozen mud soaked in red. He passed men crying out for mothers who'd been dead for years, horses limping, howling in pain. The look in the eyes of the dying was the same, no matter the banner they'd fought for. Betrayal. He'd felt that too. Inside Daenerys's command tent, the atmosphere was cold and still. Maps covered in pins and scribbles laid across the table like a game board. But this wasn't a game. This was conquest dressed in a queen's cloak. Grey Worm stood at attention beside her, Missandei's name still carved into the hilt of his pane. When Jon entered, Daenerys didn't look up. She traced her finger along the King's Road on the map. "They'll break soon," she said. "They can't hold much longer." Jon didn't. "Sit." He didn't nod. "You think they'll surrender?" he asked quietly. "They always do," she replied. He took a deep breath. "And if they don't?" She looked up then, slowly. "Then we remind them why fire was feared." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "These are your people now, not slaves, not tyrants. These are Northerners, children who followed me beyond the wall. Women who fought the Night King. They are the reason the realm still exists." Daenerys's jaw tightened. "And now they raise arms against their queen because they never chose you." Her eyes burned. "You did." The silence between them felt endless, and in that silence, Arya struck. She came through the tent flap like a breath of wind. No warning, no hesitation, blade in hand, needle sharp, a ghost in motion. But Daenerys wasn't unguarded. Grey Worm lunged faster than Arya expected. His spear swept toward her head, forcing her back. The tent exploded into chaos. Jon shouted, "Stop!" But it was too late. Arya ducked and rolled, sliced through a guard's knee, turned and came face to face with the queen. Daenerys stared at, her eyes wide then narrowed. "Stark!" she hissed. Arya lunged, and then Jon stepped between them. He caught Arya's wrist mid-air. Her blade stopped an inch from Daenerys's chest. Arya stared at him, furious, betrayed. "She's going to burn Winterfell to the ground," Arya snapped. "You think you can reason with her?" She won't stop, Jon." Jon's grip was trembling. He looked at Daenerys, then back at Arya. The weight of the moment crushed him. Daenerys raised her voice. "Kill her." Jon's heart stopped. Arya's face didn't change. "You say you're not your father," Arya said, her voice like steel. "But he didn't kill his enemies with someone else's hands." Daenerys didn't flinch. "I don't need to." "He will." Arya looked at Jon. "Well?" His hand loosened. Her wrist slipped from his grasp. Arya vanished before the guards could blink. She was gone again, like death retreating into the snow. Jon turned to Daenerys, voice low. "What have you become?" "I've become what the world forced me to be," she said coldly. "A survivor, a ruler, the last hope of order." Jon shook his head. "No, you've become what we once fought." That night, Daenerys called a war council. "The gates fall by morning," she declared. "No more mercy, no more delay. We end this." Jon stood silent, but his mind screamed. He knew Arya would try again, knew Sansa would never bend, knew Winterfell would burn if he didn't stop it. The fire wasn't just outside the walls anymore. It was inside him now. The gates of Winterfell fell at dawn. Grey Worm led the final assault, his spear carving a path through northern shields like a black arrow through snow. The fire had started even before they breached the walls, Drogon's flame licking across battlements, turning ancient stone. Red and molten, the screams echoed for miles. The smoke rose like a second sky. Inside it was chaos. Northern warriors fought like ghosts, driven not by hope, but by stubbornness, pride, memory. They knew they couldn't win, but they fought. Anyway, for home, for the old gods, for the dead, buried beneath the trees. Sansa refused to leave the great hall. She stood before the throne in the north, an old, simple chair, carved from weirwood, and waited. Armor on, sword in hand, but not to fight. Not yet. She knew Daenerys would come to her, and she did. Daenerys entered the hall flanked by Unsullied, her face dusted with ash, her eyes glowing with that cold, unreachable fire. The Dragon Queen looked around, almost disappointed by how plain the room was, how small the seat of northern power seemed compared to the one she had taken in blood. "You could have saved your people," Daenerys said. Sansa didn't blink. "And handed them to a tyrant? I freed them. You destroyed them." The tension thickened. "I should have burned this place first," Daenerys said quietly. Jon arrived then, covered in blood, though none of it was his. He looked at the room, at the women who had shaped his life and torn it apart, and for the first time, he saw both of them clearly. Daenerys turned to him. "It's done," she said. "Winterfell is ours." Jon looked around. Bodies littered the halls. The great hall, where the Stark family had once dined with honor, smelled of death. The banners, above their heads, torn, burnt. The direwolf was still visible, but only just, and then Bran was wheeled in by Arya. He sat silently, as if he'd always known this would happen. And maybe he had. Maybe he had watched it unfold from Raven's wings while they all tried to make sense of loyalty and blood. Daenerys stepped forward. "We will rebuild. A new north, one realm under one queen." Sansa stepped in her path. "You'll never have it." Daenerys didn't hesitate. "Take her." Grey Worm moved, and that's when Jon did the one thing he swore he wouldn't. He stepped between them, pulled his sword, and said, "No." Daenerys froze. "What are you doing?" Jon didn't raise the blade. He didn't threaten. He just stood there, eyes locked with hers. "If you do this," he said, "you'll never have peace. You'll never be anything more than your father's daughter." Daenerys' voice shook. "You would kill me to protect her?" "No," he said, softly, "but I will kill you to protect what's left of me." And that's when Arya moved again. This time, she didn't miss. Needle sank into Daenerys' ribs, just once, just enough, fast and clean, right under the curve of her ribs, the soft spot even armor couldn't guard. The queen gasped, eyes wide, stumbling back as Grey Worm shouted and lunged, but Bran lifted a hand, and somehow the Unsullied stopped. Just stopped, like something inside them broke. Daenerys fell to her knees. Blood stained the snow-covered stones of Winterfell's great hall. Jon caught her before she collapsed fully, cradling her like he had once dreamed of doing in a different world. She looked at him, hurt, flashing in her eyes. "You were supposed to believe." "I did," he whispered, "until you stopped being the woman I believed in." She reached for him, lips trembling. And then she was gone. The dragon's scream was the last thing anyone heard that night. Drogon came from the clouds like a god mourning a mortal. He didn't burn anyone, didn't attack. He found her body, nudged it once, and then took her in his claws, lifted her gently into the sky, and vanished forever. The aftermath was not peace. The Dothraki scattered, the Unsullied leaderless, and broken sailed south weeks later, Grey Worm gone silent, no more orders, no more vengeance. Jon refused the crown. He rode north, truly north, past the wall, past the maps, disappearing into cold, wild lands where no thrones existed, no fire, just snow and silence, perhaps to find peace, perhaps to be alone with his ghosts. Arya vanished again, west of Westeros, they said, where the maps stop, where the world forgets. Bran was named Lord of the Six Kingdoms, Sansa Queen in the north. They never saw each other again. Winterfell rebuilt. But some stones always stayed black from fire, some screams never left the wind. And the name Daenerys Stormborn became a curse whispered. In the dark, the queen who wanted to save the world and burned it instead.